The next paradigm chart is the aorist middle participle. And notice that this is the middle form. The aorist has a separate passive form. And so, and the aorist, first aorist middle participle is often used mostly for deponent verbs. So if you have a deponent verb and you want to use the aorist participle of that, the first aorist middle participle is likely the form that you'll use. And the passive participle is a separate paradigm that we'll go over after this one. So how do you form the first aorist middle participle? Well, this one's easier than the active form. You take the first aorist stem, which is basically a verbal root. So we'll take lu. You add the tense formative sa to tell that it's aorist. You add the tense formative meno or mene to show that it's middle. And you add the 2-1-2 noun endings. So if I wanted to use the nominative singular masculine forms, I would have the verbal root lu, sa as our aorist tense formative, men, nos as my participle with the second declension case ending. So lusamenos, the genitive would be lusamenu. The dative would be lusameno. The accusative would be lusammenon. The nominative plural would be the lusamenoi. The genitive plural would be lusamenon. The dative plural would be lusamenois, and the accusative plural menus. So we have again this os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us. These are second declension noun endings. So the neuter forms therefore should be relatively easy. You take the verbal root lu, add the sa tense formative, you add men, and then the ending for the second declension neuter nouns or adjectives is on. So why don't we pause here and I'll have you do the rest of the paradigm. So why don't you fill this out on your own? Just simply use the neuter case endings. The stem you're working with is lusamen, and then you simply add on, u, o, on, etc. all the way until the paradigm is fulfilled. So we'll pause here and I'll have you do that. Okay, are you ready? I'm going to show you my forms in a second. So hopefully you wrote out what you see here on the screen. Let's say the neuter forms together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Lusamenon, lusamenu, lusameno, lusamenon, lusamena, lusamenon, lusamenois, lusamena. Those are the neuter forms. Now, why don't we try the feminine forms? I'll start you off with the first one. So you take lu, you take the sa tense formative, and then you have the men. So it's the same stem, but now you're using the first declension feminine case ending. So it's lusamene, and then the genitive is lusamenes. And why don't you do the rest? We'll pause here. Are you ready? Okay, hopefully you wrote it out and you'll have the same answers that I have right here. So hopefully you have the same thing as I have here on the screen. Let's say the feminine forms together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Lusamene, lusamenes, lusamene, lusamenane, lusamenai, lusamenon, lusamenice, lusamenos. And so this is the first aorist middle participle. Notice the translation. I have, again, the adverbial translation, which is more common, but also an adjectival or substantive translation. So that's the adjective translated as a noun, substantively. This is the intensive middle. And again, I'll explain a little bit further later on how to translate the aorist participle. In this chart, we'll cover the first aorist passive participle. So we cover the active forms, we cover the middle forms. Now we're going to cover the passive participle forms. And the way we form the first aorist passive participle is we take our first aorist stem, which is our verbal root, lu. We add the tense formative thent. So you can see how when in the indicative mood, we use they as our tense formative to indicate passive voice. But for the participles, it's similar. It uses the the plus the nun tau, and this is a passive participle form. That's for the masculine and neuter forms. And then we have a separate tense formative for the feminine forms. And then we use the 3-1-3 endings. So what does this look like? Take, for the nominative singular, take lu, and then you take thent. So that's your passive tense morpheme. This nu tau tells you it's a participle. And since it's we're using the third declension endings, we're supposed to add a sigma here. But when we add the sigma, remember the nominative tends to drop the nu tau. This short vowel doesn't like being short when something drops, so it's going to turn into a diphthong. And the final form is lu thase. And so that's for the nominative singular masculine form. It's the genitive where you'll see the stem for the participle that you'll be using throughout the entire paradigm. So you take lu, or your verbal root, you take thent, and then you add the genitive ending, which is os. So luthentos is the genitive singular masculine form. Luthenti is the dative form. The accusative form is luthenta. The nominative form, plural form, is luthentes. The genitive plural form is luthentone. The dative plural form is luthent plus C or sin. And you're going to have the same thing that you saw in the nominative. The nu tau is going to drop. This epsilon does not like being short when something drops, so it's going to turn into a diphthong. Final form will be luthe C or sin. Luthe C or sin. And then accusative plural form is luthentos. So let's say the masculine forms. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Luthes, luthentos, luthenti, luthenta, luthentes, luthentone, luthesin, luthentos. And the neuter form is going to look very similar to the masculine, except for the nominative, accusative, singles, and plural endings, because it uses nothing, os, e, nothing, a, own, si or sin, a. And so you have lu plus thent, and when you add nothing to it, what happens is the tau drops, and the final form is luthen. And then the genitive, again, is where we see the stem that you use for the entire paradigm. So it's luthent plus os is luthentos. Luthenti. Luthen. Luthen, because the nominative form and the accusative singular form are the same. Luthenta. Luthentone. This is also going to be similar to the masculine dative plural. So it's lu, they, si or sin, and luthenta. So let's say the neuter paradigm. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Luthen, luthentos, luthenti, luthen, luthenta, luthentone, luthesin, luthenta. And those are the neuter forms. The feminine form is similar, but again, it uses a different tense formative. So you have lu, instead of thent, you have thase, and then you have the primary, or first declension, the first declension feminine ending. So it's lu, the, sa, lu, the, ses, lu, the, se iota subscript, lu, the, san, lu, the, psi, lu, they son, lu, they sais, and lu, they sauce. And that's your feminine forms. Again, here's your translation. The more common adverbial translation is listed first, but you can also translate it substantively, the adjective as a substantive or noun, and that's their second translation.